Welcome to Strategy Execution Unlocked and the 7th episode in our Practitioners Unfiltered series. In this series, we sit down with the founding members of the Strategy Execution Forum, practitioners spanning diverse roles, functions, and industries, all united by one common mission, helping their organizations to effectively bridge the gap between strategy and execution. Through these candid and unfiltered conversations, we explore real-world challenges these leaders face and the innovative solutions they're implementing to master both the art and science of strategy execution. Today, I'm excited to welcome Brian Hurtak to the show. Brian is a seasoned enterprise portfolio and program management leader with deep expertise in strategy execution, organizational transformation, and building high-performing project and portfolio management offices. He excels in turning complex strategic priorities into disciplined, measurable outcomes through effective governance, cross-functional alignment, and practical execution frameworks. Brian is also the author of the PlaySheet, a simple resource for overloaded professionals, drawing from coaching methodologies to help leaders build a flexible, personalized playbook for executing effectively under pressure. His philosophy of rejecting rigid one-size-fits-all approaches in favor of adaptable, repeatable plays is very much aligned with the Strategy XF playbook mindset. Brian is also a council and founding member of the Strategy Execution Forum and is helping us build the community to help elevate strategy execution into a true C-suite imperative. Brian, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, for having me. It's really an honor. I want to share how much I admire you, man. I've seen you on podcasts, I've seen you on webinars, conferences for decades, and the opportunity to join your group and be a person that gets to put some input in has been a real honor, and is because I've learned a lot of stuff in my career from following folks like you and others that are in the consortium that we're a part of, and so it's a real honor to be here today and be part of your group.
Oh, no, thank you very much. No, it's great to have you. So we always like to start out with, what does strategy execution mean to you? Because obviously it means different things to different people based on the roles and functions they've had under sort of the umbrella of strategy execution. So maybe tell us a little bit about your career to date and what strategy execution means to you.
Yeah. So, most important, I'm a husband, I'm a father of 2 kids, and I'm just your average corporate executive trying to get better in their day to day. But in my career, for the last 15 plus years, I've been at large financial institutions, all Fortune 100 companies, right? And my career started in really product and program management in both of those functions. And as I was doing that, I started to see the portfolio aspect of it, really trying to connect the dots between those that are building the strategy, executing it, and delivering the value. And I've been at every level of those. I've been on the product side, the project side, the portfolio management side, the strategy side. And so I really feel I've, over the last 15 years, have come to see what strategy execution is. And for me, it's just really connecting the dots between 3 major parts of the life cycle of a business, of anything that delivers value, right? The first is your strategy. It's like, what does the company actually want to deliver? We're all part of those big strategic planning conferences or spending months on what is our 3-year plan to deliver value to the organization or our stockholders or shareholders. And then the second is really, the big meaty piece, which is delivery. That's your program, your project, your agile, your technology, your change management shops, right? It's part of the organization that makes it happen. And then the third, which I think is probably the most underestimated and one of the hardest, is often sometimes in the finance world, but it's the value realization. It's actually achieving the goals, or it may be not achieving the goals. It may be just simply having visibility of whether you're actually achieving what you wanted. So for me, strategy execution is connecting the dots of those 3 organizations. And in so doing, it's delivering and realizing the intended value or the expected outcomes or benefits of your company's strategy. I think most organizations really, really struggle to take what we plan in strategy, what we try to execute in delivery, and what we ultimately realize and connect those dots. So to me, that's what those 3 are. And my job as a practitioner is to try to connect those dots of the people, the processes, the tools, the measures, and hopefully make it more efficient for the organization to actually achieve those values.
No, excellent. So, as you know, one of the reasons I founded the Strategy Execution Forum was because I was kind of amazed and still frustrated that as long as you and I have been in this space, right, organizations, as you say, are still struggling to bridge that gap between strategy and execution like you describe. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, let's talk for a second. There's no doubt this is a problem. Like folks that are living and breathing it, like you and me every day. But for anybody that may be watching this, like this isn't a core function or maybe newer to this practice. Look, 67%, according to Harvard Business Review's updated reports, of companies still fail at execution. Their strategies fail due to execution. December 2025, Strategy Institute studied 400 CEOs. They gave them 80 different reasons of why, of their hardest things, their biggest impediments, their biggest challenges. And the number one challenge they said was execution excellence over things like global volatility or geopolitical volatility or innovation or even the oncoming AI trends, right? That was still number one, as connecting those dots like we talked a minute ago. And I don't think there's one reason. Like I've thought about this many times, but for me, there's I'm going to give a handful, and we can double click into them if you want. One is most C-suite, most leaders think the strategy is kind of making its way, permeating through the entire organization. And most of the time, I think strategy is a secret. I've worked at very large organizations, some 200,000 plus, and most people have no clue what the strategy of the organization is. They don't get the strategy. So they think they know it, they interpret what they think that it is, and they build bottom-up plans that are not aligned, and that chasm begins to form. People are working and running that way, and the strategy is intended to be this. So it doesn't reach the people executing the work. I think that's one. Two, execution is usually its biggest pain point, and it's usually gets in its own way. It focuses, many people are very much practitioners, right? They're academic in execution, and they focus too much on how, and they focus too much on activity. And honestly, most of what they provide to C-suite and leaders infuriates them because it's jargon, it's technical, it's activity-based, and it's not really helping them deliver the value. So I think execution, most people focus too much on the how versus what they're delivering. And I got her book here, Laura Bernard. She's been somebody that's helped me along the way. In her book, she says, don't become a perfectionist of process. Instead, become a driver of business value. And I think most people in execution don't do that. Third, over time, those three areas I mentioned in your first question, they silo. And as they silo, coordination is basically lost, and they further entrench into their own areas, right? They create their own processes, their own policies, processes, systems of records, tools, measures, success measures, and they focus on those in their own area and consider that a win. But the coordination horizontally across those parts of the life cycle are lost over time, and that creates the chasm, and it creates a gap, and it basically erodes at our ability to truly deliver what matters the most. And I think ultimately that leads to more cultural entrenchment, and where people start to even resist the change. Like it becomes an us versus them situation. Like, no, we're meeting scope, schedule, budget. We're doing a great job, boss. Yeah, but our strategy is X, and finance wants to measure it this way, but they're not giving me the tools and resources I need, and I'm mad at them. So you start to see the infighting. And I think culture over time in those silos organizations actually exacerbates the ability to do it. And then the biggest problem is that we have way too many measures, and we have the wrong measures, and we don't measure what matters most, and we don't have a unified view of what our main goals and objectives are and tracking towards whether we're achieving them. So I could talk all day, but those five, just to recap: strategy is a secret. Yep. Execution focuses on the how. We get silo and coordination is lost. Culture's further entrenched, and there's no unified view.
Yeah, no, I love it. You know, it aligns with, again, why I established the strategy execution forum, right? Because you're right. I mean, if you actually look at why is strategy execution a challenge, you can actually drill down and peel layers back of the onion, whatever. There's hundreds of reasons, right? Because we'll dive into the minutiae of our role, and we'll measure things at a deep level. But to me, they line with yours. There's three main reasons, right? I don't think the C-suite understand what strategy execution is, and they certainly don't understand, which will be our next question, around what the impact of suboptimal strategy execution is. And it's a value erosion problem. It's a business value problem, right? You talked about connecting the dots. Like, the whole ethos of the strategy execution forum is it takes a village to master strategy execution, right? And it's not just bringing the the PPM, the project program portfolio side of the house together, it's spanning and integrating and optimizing the operational activity and spend. So the operations, the architecture team, everything else, right? Although it's not one of my top three. Well, it is part of the top three, but it's not the three root causes. Because the third root cause is the kind of one size fits no one type of methodologies. So
I love
misalignment.
that piece of the one size fits all. I love that. Sorry, I kind of interrupted there, but I think you mentioned that in some of your forums, like everybody jumped on the scaled agile or agile transformation bandwagon, and that goes to what I was saying of focusing on the how. It's just a different style or framework. Not that it's a bad one; it's a great one, honestly, if done right. But it's just another way of executing. And so, if you implemented an agile transformation, but you didn't know your strategy and you didn't know if you were realizing value, you didn't have the measures to see it, you basically just spent millions of dollars, time, energy, and effort to transform how you deliver waterfall versus agile, but you didn't actually solve the root cause problem.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times, and you've got to be doing this for 20 plus years to start to see the same thing kind of repeat itself, right? The problem with agile transformation, the same problem with with when PPM, in 2004, Gartner, introduced an integrated project and portfolio management. It was deployed bottom up, started with the task, worked its way all the way out to the portfolio. Exactly the same thing happened with agile transformation. Nothing wrong with agile transformation, but it started with a new way of working for teams until it hit the wall in terms of portfolio management, right? And that's where SAFe and other things came in. So we always rush to, and this is more on the kind of project program side, we always rush to solving the kind of the minutiae of execution before focusing on the portfolio side, or aka the business value that we're looking to achieve. And although I didn't mention alignment in those top three, one of the key 10 principles is the translation and communication of strategic direction across the organization, right? And I still think misalignment and strategic alignment's been an area I've focused on since we built our first product in that area in 2002, right?
Yep.
It's still one of the biggest problems, if not the biggest problem that exists out there today. So maybe drilling in on the business value side of things, right? I said, to me, one of the top reasons or root causes for organizations struggling with strategy execution, it starts at the top with the C-suite, right? Not understanding what strategy execution is, maybe thinking of it as program management on steroids, which it partly is, but that underserves or underdelivers what it actually does provide. But also they don't understand the impact, the true impact of suboptimal strategy execution capabilities, which to me is business value erosion, both the outright loss and delay or deferral of business value. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think the C-suite gets a bad rap sometimes on not understanding, what strategy execution is, or we feel they don't appreciate it. Look, these are really smart people who are in those roles for a lot of reasons. And I actually, for many of my years of my career, I would kind of get like angry or like frustrated at why don't they understand the value? And I realized I wasn't telling the story right. Like I was probably the problem. Us as practitioners get so focused on what we're doing, kind of some of those points I made earlier, that we lose focus on who our audience is and how do we share it. So for them, I think they want this to work. Obviously, they have a very vested interest in it to work. But once again, I do think some C-suite overestimate that strategic alignment's happening. And I think they also underestimate the complexity of this entire life cycle. So I think they need to understand it, or we could help them better understand it. But we overload the heck out of them. Like I talk about in my book, cognitive load, information overload, data smog, brain fog, all these things, right? And we give them strategies and budgets and dashboards and RAG ratings and go to green plans and budget updates and quarterly business reviews. And we just distract them with activity, right? So they don't really see and understand whether or not we're achieving the value. They just see a lot of activity and they can't really piece that story together. And then they're insulated, I think a lot of times. As a portfolio leader, I often see a lot of executives in the respective areas tell how their effort is doing, but they're not really raising their hand to say when things aren't going well. And we don't do a good job in the center of really connecting those dots, as I said below, right? Or across the group and showing that unified, coordinated value of whether we're achieving the strategy and its intended outcomes. And these things are hard to measure, right? And because they're hard to measure, they don't feel it, they don't see the impacts of it, and the actual value erodes over time. And by the time we start to sometimes realize it, we're behind the competitive cycle, and that frustrates them even more. And then one thing I think that's challenging for C-suite executives is, look, they have short tenures. It's kind of like the football coaches I interviewed. Like, most of them are there for like 3 years. So short-term pressure, especially at publicly traded companies, or, you know, if you're trying to stay in that job, you got to show results quickly. It is hard for them to be patient on these long-term realization of some of these major initiatives that you're doing across the organization. So I think that's where they really struggle to understand the real impact and see the value of the organization.
Yeah, because one of the things we're endeavoring to do, and I think will be important for elevating strategy execution to truly be a C-suite imperative, is, you know, better understand the sort of leading indicator metrics of business value erosion, right?
Yeah.
The the underlying metrics that suggest if these aren't firing correctly, you know, value is not going to be realized on the back end, and use that to build a sort of compelling, what our members call a value case that can be presented to the C-suite to get them to buy into proactively developing this muscle across the organization and sponsoring it from the top down, right? Which I think is critical, because normally in organizations it's kind of it starts in the middle and pushes out laterally and then tries to work its way up, right? Rather than having true top down sponsorship to be able to solve this, to overcome the biggest challenge in my mind, which is the unification of the village, bringing together the different functions, whether that's executing on strategic initiatives or discretionary activities, or whether that's optimizing, aligning the operational activity and spends. And I'd love to get your input on that.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of talking to like what I think has been the main part of my last 10 years of my career. I mean, I believe I have to orchestrate and I have to connect, right? I feel like my job is a connector. But here, let me give some examples, at least from my experience, of how I've been able to gain the C-suite or show the value of why strategy execution office is such an important part to success of your organization. One, you've got to, you're going to be at different stages based on where you are in your organization. And I'll start with one. The first thing is you got to give them visibility, right? And so I was at an organization that really didn't know what they were working on, which is crazy, right? They didn't have visibility. The C-suite did not have visibility. So the first thing I did was just basic. We got an inventory of all the initiatives. We got an inventory of all their objectives of those initiatives and how much we were spending and how many people were on it. And we just juxtaposition that against the strategy, and we put it in one big deck. That was messy, but it was like the starting point. And I'll remember the CEO of the company, it was a pretty decent sized deck. They don't like those big decks usually, but he picked it up, stood up out of his chair, and started to dance in the meeting. And he's like, I actually can see that we're working on the wrong things. Now, we haven't measured it perfectly. We haven't connected all the dots, but just by having visibility of what we're actually working on, I can tell you right now, that's not the strategy that I was thinking we were delivering on. So bottoms up was going that way. He wanted to go this way. When he had visibility, it showed the contradiction. So visibility is one. Two is when you do have visibility, now you got to show the lack of the realization, the waste, the costs of poor strategy execution. You got to make them feel the pain. Like, qualify or quantify the value leakage, the delayed benefits, right? The missed revenue, the sunk costs, the opportunity costs, the strategic, financial, and operational risk that they're inheriting by not doing the right work. So if you can actually quantify that, make them see it, but keep it simple, they're going to feel it and they're going to realize I have to solve this problem. Now, then who helps champion that is not me. I've learned when I'm the guy saying it, it may not be as valuable. So you got to have a champion. I've been in strategy offices. I've been in technology offices. I've been in finance offices. I've been, you can kind of see where they put these portfolio program, strategy execution, transform offices. They put them in all different organizations. They centralize, decentralize us, move us all over. The most effective area and the place I go after every time is the CFO. Mm-hmm. The CFO holds the purse strings, holds the dollars. And so if you can show him how we're not maximizing our return on investment and how we're showing waste, whether it's in headcount waste or we're not delivering the right thing or people aren't realizing the benefits they promised in the dog and pony show they would, that person's bought in. And then I get that CFO to champion and bring on that coalition, that village of strategy officers and technology officers and business leaders and risk leaders and ultimately the C-suite as a whole, and have that person championing it. And when I have that person talking, people listen. And when I have that person saying you're not realizing your benefits and you better or you're not going to continue to get funded, it carries way more weight than it is me. So I believe actually have that C-suite champion is really, really important. Lastly, one other tip I would say is that you got to get rid of the jargon. I think we use a ton of jargon. So even though I may be jargony right now, like when I try to speak to those C-suite executives and show them the value, I talk in their language, kitchen table, make it as simple as I can.
No, absolutely. So maybe switching gears a little bit and maybe focusing more on your book, the PlaySheet. What inspired you to write it, and what do you hope your readers take away from it?
Yeah, this was a passion project, probably like many people, and especially somebody that's listening to a podcast probably fits this persona. Like I said, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a corporate executive, and I'm just a person that was trying to get better in my personal and professional life. I was a voracious learner, right? I'd listen to all the podcasts, read all the books, listen to the audiobooks, have mentors, go to conferences, webinars, seminars, you name it. But if I was being honest with myself, I wasn't actually effectively applying all that information, all those concepts that I spent countless time, energy, and money learning. It really hit me one Sunday. So I tell this story a lot about the book. One Sunday I was sitting on my couch and I had my laptop open, preparing for the work week ahead. Papers were kind of scattered. My kids' toys were in the living room. It was a mess. I was already stressed out, overwhelmed, and overloaded, and the work week hadn't started. In the corner of my eye, I saw something. You can tell from behind me, I'm a sports guy. And I saw something on TV. It was Sunday. It was an NFL football game, and it was a coach sitting on the sideline, not sitting, pacing the sideline like very feverishly with one of these, an 8x11 laminated sheet of paper. And what I realized in that moment is that coach would look at the formation, assess the situation in a matter of seconds. The clock was ticking down, the pressure was high, the crowd noise was high. In a matter of seconds, they'd glance down, call a play, and execute that play pretty flawlessly. And they would do that over and over and over again. And then I realized every coach on every sideline at every level used one of these laminated sheets of paper. And I asked myself, like, why don't I have one of those in my own life to actually apply all those things I spent all that time, energy, money learning? And so I went back in my home office that day and I created a laminated. I basically wrote it down. I went to FedEx, I laminated it, and I started using it at work. I just wrote down the concepts I was trying to play. And at that time, it was like being a new manager, time management skills, effective and clear communication, both from a coaching my team and also from an executive level. And I started to run those plays intentionally with my play sheet every single day. And it started to work. It kind of became a joke. Like people were like, what is Coach Brian doing over here with this laminated sheet of paper? But others started to ask, like, can you help me build one? And I was like, you know what? I don't know the first thing about how coaches actually create this. So I went on a journey for 2 years and I studied football coaches at every level and their process of taking massive amounts of information, creating their playbook, and ultimately creating their play sheet. And that led to conversations. And when I had those conversations with coaches, I saw a trend. They all did 4 things. 1, they all had an ethos. They all were very clear of who they were and who they were not. And that set the filter of everything that they did, every hire they made, every play they added to their playbook or pulled down to their play sheet, the style of the culture of their organization, of their team. They all started with ethos. 2, they had one centralized repository for everything, all their policy, procedures, nutrition plans, workout plans, plays, everything. They had the playbook. 3, they had a play sheet based on the situation they were facing that week, the opponent they're facing that week. They take information for their playbook that was relevant, put it on their play sheet, and you could see them call it in those real-time moments. And then lastly, all coaches talked about making adjustments, which for me, like, was no different than inspect and adapt or retrospectives, right? Or hot wash or any of those things. Well, what they did is that they made in-game adjustments, halftime adjustments, mid-season adjustments, and over time they constantly and iteratively improved on those plays, making them better and better. So ultimately, I took that concept and said, how can you apply it in your personal or professional life? And I guess what, latter part of your question is what I hope my readers get from that is that, just like me, I hope they actually start applying what they learned with this simple framework that works at every level of football, American football in the United States. And I hope that they actually start to achieve more personal and professional wins with it. Lastly, I hope they actually then share it with somebody else. What I loved about the coaches is they were mentors. They really hoped to inspire young athletes to be better. And so one part of my book is like, buy two of them, one for yourself and one for somebody else. So I hope they share the concept with somebody else.
No, that's great. I've got boys that play American football, and I often wondered what went into the play sheet you see the coaches using on the sidelines. But this also relates back to the strategy execution forum. We reject that kind of one size fits all methodology or framework, and this is where I think your book, the play sheet, aligns with our philosophy around our playbook, where we're expecting organizations to reject that one size fits all approach and leverage different approaches to achieve each of the 10 key principles to master strategy execution. So how are you leveraging the concepts in your play sheet book to strategy execution in your corporate life?
Yeah, so I think the playbook is what you've been building, which, by the way, I'm a consumer of, and I think having a playbook is necessary. You have to have one place. Like in our personal and professional, even our corporate lives, like the stuff is everywhere. It's not organized. It's not easily accessible. So you got to have a good playbook. It's got to be well structured, well organized, good taxonomy. So please keep adding to it, Ben, because I am a consumer of your playbook. And what I love about your playbook is that it is crowdsourced from all the greatest practitioners on their lessons over the course of their career. So there's so many good pieces of information and pieces of advice that are in your playbook. But the difference is the playbook is overwhelming. And it is a one size fits all. Like, it has just a bunch of concepts. That doesn't mean every single concept is going to work for you, and it may not work today. Like, when it's relevant is different for every person, every organization. So I think that's where the play sheet comes in. So let me say it this way. What I think you need to do is first is kind of what the coaches did, is what is your ethos? Like, you need to determine who you are and what you need to focus on. And that is where you start. And then you leverage your playbook. And then the next question you need to ask yourself is, what are we facing over the next quarter or 2 quarters? And that helps you build your game plan, right? So then I can go to your playbook and find the relevant pieces that match what my opponent is in my corporate arena, and say, based on those plays, I'm going to pull those concepts down and I'm going to create my own subset, which is a play sheet, which makes it more flexible, it's more contextual and more specific. And if you think about the difference between playbook and play sheet, like, the playbook is everything. The play sheet is like 20 or 30 plays based on the situation and opponent you're facing right now. So I believe what you can do is leverage your playbook, ask yourself, what are we facing today? And then take the relevant concepts from your playbook, create your own customized play sheet, and start to run those plays, and then set up routines to review, like, are they working? Because just because they work for you or they worked in general doesn't mean that they're going to fit exactly. So think about a coach here real quick. Coaches run a play. That play probably came from another coach and another team. But as they run it, they figure out how it actually gets more customized and personalized for their team. They may run on the left side of the field versus the right side of the field. They may run it with different personnel. They may run it at different times of the game. So what they're doing is they watch the tape, they iterate, they customize, and they make those adjustments. And over time, those plays get better and better and better. and more relevant. So I think the answer to your question is, first, determine who you are, who you want to be in your ethos. Go get your playbook, figure out and ask yourself, what are we facing over the next, quarter or 2 quarters? Pull down the relevant plays, and then set up routines to see if those plays are working and iterate them so they are more relatable and more cultural for you based on who you are and what your team is facing.
Yeah, that makes a huge amount of sense. I think hadn't thought about it that way, but we are building a kind of playbook at the forum of all the coaches' plays, right? Everyone that's gone out and tried to address strategy execution, we want to crowdsource those lessons learned and plays that work for them in those situations, right? Because we, as I said, are a strong believer that we have the 10 principles you need to master, but there could be a variety of ways. We talked about misalignment, right? And principle 3 is, how do we translate and communicate strategic directions? In other words, how do we effectively define, decompose, set metrics, and communicate strategy across the organization? I could think of 5 textbook techniques of doing that, right? I mean, scorecard on one end, the new OKR methods on the other end, Hoshinkanri and others somewhere in the middle, right? But what's working, right? And my bet is the textbook approach isn't working, right? Because otherwise we'd be doing a lot better of that in an organization. For organizations that are mastering that, and I think it's very few, probably using a kind of blended approach, a bit of a pick and mix, or use a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of this to come up with a play that works, right? So I think, by creating that overall playbook of proven battle-tested approaches used by, the coaches within an organization that are looking to orchestrate and develop that strategy execution muscle, we're going to be able to learn very quickly as a community and sort of circumnavigate the kind of usual mistakes, the dark alleys that people go down, and learn for themselves from their own experiences, right? I like the idea of the analogy of, adjusting the plays week by week as you face new opponents, and maybe extending that to quarter by quarter as you're in a corporate environment, looking to, because in essence what we're looking to do here is improve those leading indicators of business value erosion as we develop that strategy execution muscle by unifying the village and bringing the key functions together, right? And then keep tweaking that, because this is not a one and done exercise. This is not a one-time transformation. This is a continuous journey that you're going to keep developing that capability in the organization, right?
Yes, some of those plays are just not relevant today, but they're going to be. And I often simplify an example from the personal development. Like, I would read a lot of parenting books when I became a dad. I shared this with you before we got on. There was a lot of great concepts when my kids were 2 and 4 that just weren't going to be relevant. Like sibling rivalry wasn't relevant when they were 2 and 4. It is hecka relevant now that they're 7 and 9 in the backseat of a car. You know what I mean? So but it was in the playbook. So, I put it in there. I read the concept. I put it in my playbook. I use OneNote for my personal playbook. And then I assessed, okay, as a dad, what is the opponent now? And sibling rivalry was like definitely on the top of that list now, a couple months ago. And so I pulled those concepts. I went back and revisited them, put them on my play sheet, laminated the sheet of paper, put it on my desk and in my car and in the kitchen. And when they're fighting, like, I don't naturally think about the psychology of how to approach it in that moment, but I have a cheat sheet. And I ask questions I wouldn't naturally ask or frame a certain thing with my kids, and it helps diffuse the rivalry in that moment. It's no different. And I know I'm talking pretty hypothetical or pretty big, but you have such important concepts, like, based on where you are in the stage of your life cycle of maturity of that organization. Like, maybe you're trying to sell strategy execution. There's certain tactics that you're going to learn from your playbook, Ben, that are, how do I sell this to the C-suite?
Yeah.
Then you may sell it and you're like, crap, I don't have the right measures to show the unified connective tissue of how we're delivering on the strategic value, right? What are the right ways to measure it? And that's a very different set of concepts and plays. So the big question your audience should use, or anybody in our area, is like, what is our big rock right now? Game plan for that, pull the plays, and then run them. And I think the word here is they're going to be intentional. And they're not going to be overloaded with too much. They're going to be really focused on mastering that concept in reality versus, practically.
No, I love it. I mean, I never really thought about the difference until now of a playbook and a play sheet. And, with your approval and permission, I may, use the concept in the forum, right? Because it's exactly what we're doing, right? We are building a personalized play sheet that is going to evolve, from the library of information that represents the plays that are part of the playbook, right?
Let me give you one that hits home. Imagine that same coach pacing the sideline, not with one of these, but their entire playbook. How many pages ultimately will your playbook be on Circle, right? It's going to be printed out probably a good amount of pages, right? That would be the problem statement of my book was information overload, cognitive load. And if a coach was on the sideline with their entire playbook and they saw the formation and had 3 seconds to look at the formation and call a play from a Rolodex of plays, they would sink. They'd be overloaded. They'd be frustrated. That's what I think a lot of people, they're trying to do it in their head, which is even worse. So it's just a cheat sheet to get them really focused. And that question of what am I facing now? Like, get really targeted on it, focus on it, and use it. So yeah, you can use, like, that's why I wrote this thing. Like, I didn't come up with the concept, football coaches did, and every one of them use it at every level, and there's a reason it works. Like, this is a proven framework. It's just in a different arena of football versus it could be in corporate America or your personal or professional life.
Yeah, we talk a lot of the forum about the need, once we've got that C-suite buy-in, the need to have that dedicated function or enterprise office that is going to become the architects of the strategy execution capability across the organization, or the coaches that are going to pick the right plays for that organization. And I like what you were just saying there in terms of, you can't have the playbook in hand, because a lot of times when those functions get established, they come and build, what I call paint by numbers governance models, right? As you said earlier, right? This is exactly how you're going to operate in every single situation, right? And versus what I think it needs to do, which is the minimal controls needed, right, to be able to, maximize and accelerate value on the back end, right? So and pick the plays that represent that, right?
I used to have, when I started building portfolio management office, I thought they needed to be like 30, 40 people. But look, most C-suite are fatigued on the PMO, transformation strategy execution, and they often come with big consulting bills. They often come with heavy cost shop organizations that are truly not executing the value, they're orchestrating and governing it. So the perception of our practice is expensive. So honestly, it's got to be lean and simple shops. And so the more weight you bring to them, the more you lose the audience of the C-suite. They want to see something that is simple, lean, and effective. And so you have to package it in a way that it will be those things and not distract them with the complexities behind the curtain of what it takes to do it. And that's not hard, because you feel a little bit underappreciated about that. But the reality, that's how you're going to be successful in getting their buy-in and being a lasting organization. Because also, I've seen a lot of portfolio management offices get stood up, do well for 2 or 3 years, and then they fold because they bloat.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. I think one of the reasons why you don't see the executive buy-in or the sponsorship of a true strategy execution function is because normally it's a reactive play, right? Which comes with a Big Four consulting check, which I think is the wrong way, because going back to not a one size fits all, right? When you bring in the big consulting shop, they're going to apply their playbook that they think worked for the last 3 customers, but it won't, because strategy execution governance processes have to be heavily personalized to the idiosyncrasies, nuances, culture of every organization. What works for you, your current employer, may not work, if your next employer, assuming you move, right?
Yep.
So I think that's the issue. That's why that strategy execution office, in my mind, whether they're the architects of this process or the coaches that are going to look at the players on the field, right? And because it's not just about project and portfolio management, it's about integrating architecture, operations, right? The strategy team, bringing everyone together, right? And those functions already exist, right? So it's about the multiplier effect of getting the best out of your team that exists today, not necessarily needing to create a whole new organization. Maybe there are a few architects or coaches in that office that need to be able to pull everything together, but you've got most of the players on the field already, right?
Yeah, I like I said, I feel what I've learned in my career is I'm a connector. And the connector is, yes, I have what I would call a cross-functional team that doesn't report to me most of the time, of strategy partners, of technology partners, whether those are the architects or the portfolio managers of technology or those actually delivering the technology, the CIOs, et cetera. Your finance partners, those that are doing the cost side and the benefit side, the risk partners. I'm in financial institutions, risk is a big part of it. So honestly, none of those people report to me, but we basically create a horizontal team, a village that's, a portion of our job. It's a role of our job. It's not a true job role, a job title, and it's not organizationally structured, hierarchically structured, but we have a defined objective of what we're trying to solve collectively. And I'm kind of the orchestrator of those together to communicate the value back up to the business.
No, that's perfect. Well, don't want to keep you much longer. Maybe ending on what are the sort of future trends do you see for strategy execution? What's going to drive this over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. So AI, I mean, nobody can, I know everybody's like sick and tired of that one, but like, let me tell you like my concept, and I can't say what we're doing, but let me say the the agentic piece of portfolio management is critical. I believe you've got to have all of your inputs, right? Of like, what are all the strategy? If you can put all those inputs into your library, right? Your data model, in your data architecture, you got to have that taxonomy, that structure. And if you have that, you can then build agents for each part of your model. And I believe that's everything from intake to business case development to capacity management to portfolio prioritization. You probably want a human element to do the checks and balances of, yes, let's go that way. And then ultimately governance and optimization, and then the circle kind of repeats itself. And then you can automate triggers, like, are there macroeconomic trends? Are we not realizing our benefits? Are we behind on plan? Are we, do we not have the right resource mix? And those triggers can kick off the cycle and then leverage those agents to do the work. So I believe that life cycle of leveraging agentic bots and agentic AI, to do it is going to be really, really important to what we do. And that'll further bleed into what I think is portfolio management will need to be small and lean and simple is necessary. I think we really, the hard one in our industry is that everything is so fast. So most organizations are still on that like strategic planning and operational planning and annual planning. Continuous planning is often thought as quarterly, but I mean, a lot of big organizations got to be fast. So I think you're going to see continuous speed to market and speed to value is going to be another trend that you don't see, as well. And I think that makes it another topic around that I'm researching even more and more is then how do you manage your capacity when you're moving that fast? Like you hired a whole bunch of electricians, then all of a sudden something shifts and you got to have plumbers. Like that's hard. And I think that is the supply and demand piece of what we do is often overlooked and often a huge erosion of your value, and it slows you up. And so I think that's a big one. And then, you know, value realization is where I live and breathe, man. So I think that is it. So in summary, AI, small lean shops, fast cycles, going to continuous capacity optimization and value realization are, I think, critical trends for anybody in our business, our space to get the playbook out and start running plays.
Yeah, it's no doubt AI is going to have a big impact, right, on everything. But I also feel like I've been saying this for maybe the last 5 7 years that now I think strategy execution could become a C-suite imperative if communicated incorrectly, right? And it could become a true mainstream discipline, like it should be, driven top down. Every organization needs to develop that muscle so they can deal with whatever disruptions come their way, internal, external. Obviously, AI is a big disruptor at the moment, right? What I'm talking about is developing that muscle that allows you to deal with the next disruption, the next burning platform.
Let me see if I think we're on the same. I 100% agree. You need to move it from a project optimization or project administration office to a strategic operating system. And that operating system should be part of the C-suite. I mean, to me, the functional piece of project administration is not something that's going to continue to survive in an efficient area of what Gen AI is driving. Your technology organizations are, cutting themselves by X%. We're just going to be downstream impacts of that. So it's got to be part of the C-suite. It's got to be an operating system of how you actually operate versus a functional part of your organization.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. Well, Brian, as I said, I don't want to keep you any longer. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show today. And I'd love to have you on a future episode, maybe where we dive into a subject like how to make value realization a reality, or maybe how to pitch and get buy-in from the C-suite in terms of how to develop that strategy execution muscle or capability across the organization. Thanks again for your time.
It's been an honor, Ben. Thanks for having me, man.